All right, so today we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation. Before we do, let's look at this graphic. So under the Articles of Confederation, the first United States government was a confederation. So which graphic below represents a confederation? So is it going to be this one, where they're all together? Everybody shares some kind of power? This one, where there's central government and then they delegate to the states? There's no shared power? Or this one, where they're loosely established states and then a central government that doesn't really have any connection to the states. So it's the graphic on the right, the one with the green and the yellow, because it shows a weak central government with a loose union of states that have power. So what type of government system do the other two graphics represent? So this one represents a federal system because it shows that the power is shared between the national, state, and local governments. And then the graphic in the middle represents a unitary system because it shows the central government holding the power and giving some powers to the states, but they don't share any power. So delegates to the Second Continental Congress debated the distribution of power between the national and state governments. The Articles of Confederation established a loose union among independent states with only a simple central government. The central government had no court system, no executive, and a unicameral legislature with only the powers named in the Articles. Each state had one vote in Congress and all other powers not named in the Articles. The new states operated independently, issuing individual currencies and imposing tariffs or taxes on one another. So that meant like Georgia made their own money. South Carolina made their own money. So if somebody from Georgia went to South Carolina, they couldn't buy stuff unless they transferred their Georgia currency into the South Carolina currency. That also meant that the Georgia currency didn't necessarily translate dollar for dollar to South Carolina. The South Carolina dollar could have been worth $1.20 of the Georgia dollar. So it wasn't equal in that sense. The weak national government could not force states to give it money and had to rely on state courts to enforce and interpret national laws. So the central government could not collect taxes. They couldn't enforce laws, they could only suggest them. Key achievements of the Confederation were the treaty with Britain, laws for organizing Western land, approving money for a navy, and creating cabinet departments. Shays' Rebellion spread unrest to other states, and American leaders believed the national government was vulnerable to anarchy. Following Shays' Rebellion, delegates proposed changes to the Articles of Confederation to make the national government more effective. Congress consented to a convention with the sole purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. So Shays' Rebellion was a group of farmers who were angry about the tax increases or the government trying to impose taxes to help pay for their war debt. So let's watch a video about it. Actually, let's review this first and then we'll watch the video. So in the 1780s, after the Revolution, economic conditions became difficult for farmers due to bad harvests and recession. When Massachusetts farmers could not pay their debts, the courts ordered government authorities to seize their farms and even put them in prison. Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army, led hundreds of armed men to close down the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and they used force to free imprisoned debtors from jail. In December 1786, the governor of Massachusetts sent a militia force to stop Shays. Shays and his men fled the militia after a brief skirmish at the Federal Armory in Springfield. Shays' Rebellion caused great concern that the weak central government under the Articles of Confederation could not maintain order. So now let's watch the video. Oops.
The Revolutionary War left American states in debt. To raise money, legislators raised taxes. This angered poor farmers and war veterans to the point where they formed a rebellion and almost caused a civil war in Massachusetts. Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army, led the protest, which came to be known as Shays' Rebellion. In the summer of 1786, several thousand of Shays' followers prevented tax collection and used force to keep debtors out of prison. They headed to Springfield to seize weapons, intending to force the Boston legislature to change the law. Massachusetts residents were terrified. The legislature realized it was powerless. The Continental Army had been disbanded after the Revolutionary War, and the federal government had no money for new troops. Finally, wealthy merchants in Boston agreed to raise an army of over 4,000 militia to fight Shays' men.
These men were talking about forming a new country out there. There's no telling what might have happened. If Shays' Rebellion had flourished, if these guys had been able to grab all the guns in that arsenal and armed a big army, it would have been a very bad thing for the country. The people in Boston sort of put together a 4,000-man army and marched across western Massachusetts and basically blew Daniel Shays and his friends away. They all ran for their lives when they saw these guys coming at them.
Shays and his troops were eventually pardoned, and Massachusetts began to offer tax and debt relief. Locally, this clash was anticlimactic, but Shays' Rebellion had momentous consequences for the nation. It highlighted a weakness in the Articles of Confederation, which didn't give Congress the right to establish or fund an army.
The impact of Shays' Rebellion was convincing people that we had to have a really strong federal government. Washington, and now I say Hamilton, and a lot of other people said, this proves that we've got to have a new Constitution.
So now we're going to watch one more video and then we're going to do an activity.
The very first document to direct how the United States should be governed was the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. In the summer of 1776, with the Revolutionary War raging, Congress urgently needed to create a functioning government. They entrusted John Dickinson, a delegate from Pennsylvania, to draft the Articles. Dickinson, like many delegates, wanted to avoid creating a strong central government like the one they were still fighting against in the Revolutionary War. In his draft of the Articles, Dickinson was careful to give the states as much independence as possible while limiting the functions of the new federal government. Many revisions would be made before Congress adopted the Articles. Disagreements over boundaries, taxation, and expansion had to be resolved. After more than a year of debate, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Articles on November 15, 1777. The Articles served as a non-binding plan of government until each state ratified it. More than 3 years passed before the last state, Maryland, ratified the Articles on March 1, 1781.
That means accepted it.
In its approved form, the Articles united the new 13 American states into a loose confederation. It had the power to make war, negotiate diplomatic agreements, and approve Western expansion in conjunction with the Northwest Ordinance, but little more. The Articles were intended to create a weak national government designed to deal only with an immediate crisis. But following the conclusion of the War of Independence and the emergence of new priorities, its many inadequacies became obvious. The government under the Articles couldn't collect taxes or regulate trade. It couldn't even force the states to comply with the laws it passed. It's no wonder that George Washington described the government created by the Articles as little more than the shadow without the substance. As the need for a stronger federal government became apparent, Political leaders from throughout the states gathered to decide how to create it. The Federal Constitutional Convention of 1787 drafted the much stronger Constitution of the United States, which replaced the Articles of Confederation in 1789.
All right, so let's do this activity. All right, so the Articles of Confederation created a government structure with many weaknesses. These weaknesses caused problems for the newly independent United States. So now we're going to drag each weakness to its corresponding result. So our weaknesses are: there was no executive branch or president. Congress could not levy taxes or require states to provide money. There was no national court system. Amendments to the Articles required approval of all 13 states. New laws required approval from 9 of the 13 states. Congress lacked law enforcement powers, and Congress could not control foreign trade. So the result, the first one, the central government passed few national laws. So look at our weaknesses and which one do you think would go with that result? I'm going to go with the new laws required approval from 9 of the 13 states. This one talks about law enforcement. Law enforcement was left to the states. So we're going to match it with the words law enforcement right here. We're going to drag Congress lacked law enforcement powers, so it was left to the states. The next result, it was nearly impossible to change the government's powers. So that's an amendment. Change is an amendment. So which one of the weaknesses do we have left deals with amendments? Amendments are changes. So it's going to be this one. Amendments to the Articles required approval of all 13 states. Our next result, states had separate trade agreements with other nations. So which weakness talks about trade? It's going to be our last one. Congress could not control foreign trade. Our result, the central government's work was not effectively managed. So we need a manager. Which one of our weaknesses left talks about a manager? That would be the president, an executive branch. They're the managers. The central government lacked money to operate or pay war debts. Which one talks about money? That would be our first one up here. Congress could not levy taxes or require states to provide money. And our final result, the central government could not resolve disputes among the states. That means there was no national court system. Yay, we got them all right. All right, now what I need you to do is go into Canvas, complete the reading essentials, answer the discussion question, complete the quiz, and work on the Edgenuity module assigned for today.